Hey there, guys. It's Nick, the ASMR nerd, and welcome to another episode of Relaxing Reviews. Today, we are looking at the Drop Control, a mechanical keyboard that is designed and sold by Drop.com, the popular group buy website. Drop advertises the control as the ultimate tenkeyless mechanical keyboard, and certainly on paper it appears to be so. It's got a really impressive feature set, from a heavy aluminum case to fully hot-swappable plate mount sockets to RGB backlighting and edge lighting to USB Type-C, open source QMK firmware, all kinds of really desirable features that make it clear that this keyboard is designed for and intended for an enthusiast type audience. And it does have a price point to match. The control comes in at $200 US, but given the feature set and given the purported build quality and the hot swap sockets, it's possible that the control will be the last keyboard that you ever need to buy. After all, if you can swap out the switches and it's built solidly, and swap out the keycaps, and you can change it to suit whatever typing feel or aesthetic you're looking for. So I'm very, very keen to show you guys Drop's Control keyboard. And of course, Drop.com was kind enough to send over a control for us to take a look at here today. Now, I must let you know that this review is actually long overdue. I've had the control for many months, and in fact, large portions of the review that you are about to see were filmed many months ago, right after I got the control. But for various reasons that I'm not going to get into, I wasn't able to publish the review at that time, and I've been holding on to this footage ever since. But I really wanted to get a review of the control out for you guys to see, because I think it is a very interesting keyboard, and I am excited to share it with you. I've talked about it quite a bit, actually, on streams, like on Twitch and stuff, and in other venues. It's come up quite a bit in discussion when you guys ask me about, for example, what keyboard I recommend for a daily driver, these sorts of things. So here we are, finally. I've got the Drop Control review for you guys. However, because it's been a while since I reviewed it, a few small things have changed in the intervening months. Perhaps the most notable is the branding. At the time that Drop sent me this keyboard, they had recently undergone a rebranding from massdrop.com to drop.com. They used to be called Massdrop, and that name might be familiar to you. They are now drop.com, but the box for this keyboard still says Massdrop on it. And at the time that I filmed the unboxing and such, their website did too. So I refer to this keyboard throughout the review as the Massdrop Control, just to let you know so you're not confused. It's not a major thing. Now, it's possible that some other small things may have changed in the meantime, things like the packaging, some of the branding, but I'm fairly confident that the core features of the board, the aesthetics, the software, all that sort of stuff has remained the same since I filmed portions of this review. So I don't think there are going to be any significant discrepancies between what you see in this review and what you could order from drop.com today. But I do just want to let you know that it has been some time and there is the possibility for small variances there. I think it's only fair to let you know. So, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let's dive in and take a closer look at drop.com's control keyboard. And here we have the mass drop control inbox. And as you can see, it is a very minimalistic design on the box, but still professional. It looks very clean, I would say. I'm going to keep calling it the mass drop control, by the way, because even though they've rebranded to drop.com, it still says mass drop on the box here. And I think the formal name of this product is the mass drop control. So, in case there's any confusion, that's why I'm calling it the mass drop control. So in terms of the box, not a lot to see here. We've got sort of a stencil of the keyboard here, which is just a standard tenkeyless layout. And then we've got product name over here. The mass drop control, CTRL, mechanical keyboard. Nothing else on the front, just this green bar along the top to complement all this white. It looks very clean, actually. I'm a big fan of this kind of design and the color that they chose to accent it. Nothing on the front flap except a sticker, which we will remove in a moment. Nothing on either side. This plastic is kind of, or this, pardon me, cardboard is kind of a, what you might call like a satin finish, I guess. It's somewhere between glossy and matte. It's not really glossy, but it's not really matte. And nothing on the back of the spine here either. Just clean all around. But the box is heavy. It's quite heavy. This feels very solid. On the back, not too much to be seen. A little bit of descriptive information. Model identifiers and such. And some FCC compliant stuff. A couple of barcodes over here. If I read this, it says fully programmable with a heavy aluminum frame. They're not joking about the heavy part. Customizable backlighting, dual USB-C connections, and PBT keycaps. The mass drop control gives you power over your desktop. Control mechanical keyboard, model MDX 21292. Mass drop INC, now drop.com. Manufactured in China. So, not much to be seen here. Very straightforward. This particular version of the keyboard comes with Kale Speed Silver switches, which is interesting because I didn't know Kale made Speed Silver. I thought those were sort of a Cherry exclusive still, but of course they will be cloned. They have been cloned. I'm curious to try out Kale's Speed Silver switches. Never used Speed Silvers before. Speed Silvers are a very fast switch related to a Cherry MX Red. They have similar actuation force and they are linear like an MX Red, but they have a shorter travel distance, so they bottom out sooner, which in theory allows you to complete your keystrokes faster. The actuation point sits a little higher as well, Although in a linear switch, it's hard to know when you've actuated. You don't get that feedback, so I tend to bottom out with linear switches. Honestly, I tend to bottom out with most switches. That's just how I type. But and it's also clear that this board was produced before Mastrop's rebranding, because it does say Mastrop INC on there. Like I said, though, I think they're still calling it the Mastrop control, even after the rebranding. All right, let's open it up, see what's inside. Okay, so first thing to note is this really nice padding on the top of the lid, which affords the keyboard inside a fair amount of protection. It's just a sort of a dense foam. Around the edges, interestingly, no padding. We have some thicker cardboard here and over here, sort of folded over, but no foam padding. Not even really much in the way of cardboard padding. And in the front, there's literally nothing. Just thin cardboard between the exterior and your keyboard. But that said, Drop did ship this in a separate box. So it was a box within a box, which is incidentally why this box looks so nice. It did not suffer the slings and arrows of the mail system or the courier, whoever brought it. I don't even remember. We have a card here, which is cardboard. It has keyboard shortcuts, default hotkeys, LED backlighting control keys, media keys, other keyboard options, customizable firmware. That's right, of course, because this board here uses the QMK core, which is open source keyboard software, which is fantastic. That's really, really good. Then on the back here, it talks about the warranty. Let's read about the warranty, because I am curious. In the event that the product purchased experiences defect or failure, please contact Mastrop support, blah, blah, blah. Surely it must give me the length of the warranty here. You are responsible for the cost of return shipping if a request is submitted after 2 weeks of receiving the item, so that's important to know. It doesn't actually seem to say how long the warranty lasts for. That's frustrating. It may say online. I'll try and find that information. I thought for sure they'd be upfront about it. That's frustrating. Initial startup. Yep. Either of the USB-C ports on the control can be used to connect your keyboard to your computer. Okay. And it should work out of the box with both OS X and Windows. USB hub functionality. After connecting the control keyboard to your computer, the unused USB-C port can be used as an I/O port for your computer. The keyboard dynamically measures and manages power utilization on the USB V-bus. Typical capacity will vary depending upon the host computer, but can be expected to range between 2 and 4 watts. That's cool. So you can connect on either port, and I assume there's one on each side of the keyboard, and then the other one automatically becomes a functional USB port. Presumably it will carry data, but you could also use it to charge things. That's really neat. Okay. Let's pull the board out. Aha. Nicely protected on the bottom. at this thick, thick foam. Nice and dense. And we have some really nice looking accessories here. Very nice presentation. We have a very frou-frou keycap puller. It's metal. Check it out, guys. It looks like a lightsaber, doesn't it? Looks like kind of a long lightsaber. If you like cut it off right there, it'll look just like a lightsaber. But it is a keycap puller. Oh, it unscrews. Huh. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but anyway, it's a wire style keycap puller, which is a good thing. Much higher quality, much better for your caps. So that's great, and I like that nice metal handle. Feels very premium. We have here a switch puller that feels decidedly less premium. It's just a hunk of metal, but it's a little nicer. The finish on it is a little better than what I've seen on my other hot-swappable boards. The edges are nicely finished, so that it's not just like raw and sharp. And it's kind of got a matte texturing to it, so it looks alright. It'll get the job done. Guess you don't need to overcomplicate things. We have 2 feet. The feet on the control are removable and standalone. They are evidently magnetic. I've seen this on one keyboard before, on the Drivo Caliber. It had magnetic standalone feet. I still don't really know why companies do this, honestly. These feel nice. They are metal. Very solid, heavy metal. Heavy metal. They say control on them, CTRL. And they've got these non-stick feet. And they sit, or they'll help prop your keyboard up at an angle. But what I don't understand is why you would not just have flip-out feet. I guess these feel a little more special, but if you lose them, you're kind of screwed, right? You don't have feet for your keyboard anymore. Or if you lose one of them, you're kind of screwed because one foot's not going to do you much good. You're going to have wobbly boards. So a strange choice, but a nice looking choice, and they feel very high quality. Like I said, they're solid metal, and they're magnetic. So anyway, there's that. Put them over here. And last but not least, USB cable. Type C on one end, to Type A on the other. It is a USB Type 3 cable. It says right there, Super SS for super speed, Type 3. Which is good, actually. That means that anything you connect through the hub will connect at USB 3 speeds, which is excellent. That said, nothing else special about this cable. It's so boring. In fact, I'm not even going to take it out of the plastic because there's no special molding on it, no mass drop branding, nothing like that. It looks like it's of decent length, probably 3 feet-ish, maybe a little bit longer. And it's not gold-plated or anything like that, so really pretty basic. It's not braided. I'm a little disappointed. In fact, I would hope with a keyboard of this price that you would get a braided cable, but no. It's just standard. Looks like PVC housing, casing. Anyway, so be it. And of course, the silica gel. Do not eat. But nicely protected in here from top and bottom between sort of a nice thick piece of foam down here and this piece on top here. All right, that's all the pack-ins, and there's no other, instruction booklet or anything. So surprisingly less there than most keyboards I've opened. Although the quality of the pack-ins does look very good. No extra keycaps or anything like that, no extra switches, despite it being a hot-swappable board. So that's a little disappointing again at this price point. But, of course, the real make or break is with the board itself. So let's get to that. The board comes wrapped in this sort of foam, spongy foam baggie, and comes out this end. And there we have it. The mass drop control tenkeyless board. It looks really nice. That is my first impression of this board. The keycaps are actually darker than I expected. The gray tones are darker, even on the alphas. Oh, those feel nice. Those feel really nice. They are very textured, much more roughly textured than any caps I think I've ever used. They have quite a grit to them, but it feels very good. You can see that the entire board uses this sort of floating style of switches and caps, where they sit on top of what is essentially a plank of aluminum. But it's not just aluminum, because you can see it's kind of a little sandwich. We've got a big solid chunk of aluminum on the top here, and this feels like it. This is a heavy, heavy board. This feels super solid. Big piece of aluminum on the top, then a layer of plastic, because this board has 360-degree side lighting all the way around. And then another thinner piece of aluminum, which is the back of the board. The aluminum itself is an anodized type aluminum. It's got this, sort of matte texture to it. I think they call that anodized. The texture is like a little bit sort of blasted, like almost like a sandblasted finish. But you can see it's very simple in its actual design. It's literally just this piece of aluminum, these rounded corners, and then sort of these layers. And the layout is perfectly standard. There is nothing non-standard about this layout, so should you want to, you could replace these keycaps very easily, but I don't know why you'd want to, because they feel fantastic and they look amazing. Let's take a look around the other sides and the back of this thing first. There's that side. You can see the board is perfectly flat when you're not using those feet. So if you like a flat typing experience, this is a good board for you. On the back, we have a USB Type-C port here, and another one here. And as we read, either can be used for connectivity, and then the other becomes a powered USB hub. Nothing over here. On the back, we have just a solid surface, pretty much, of aluminum. This nice silver aluminum. Same finish as on the front. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individual anti-skid feet. We have some information here. It says mass drop control, mechanical keyboard, model number, some certifications, of course. We've got some very clearly exposed screws, which add to this sort of industrial look on the back. And then we have these spots, which must be for the feet. So let's try that out. Let's just pop this on. There we go. Sits in there like so. Props up your board. Put the other one on. They look very smart. They work very well. I just worry that I would lose them, you know? Then we get a nice, gentle angle on our board, as you can see. Let's take those off. Now, weirdly, you can put them up. Ooh, these are stiff. Goodness me. There we go. You can put them up here too. Also magnetic. I don't know why you do that. Because that doesn't seem very usable to me. I guess if you wanted the front of your board angled up, then that's an option. But I don't know why. I don't know why you would. Very strange. Oh, these are very firmly attached. The magnets are pretty strong. Oh, come on. There. Alright, well that's totally functional. Only other thing on the back here is a little hole. Maybe it's a drain hole. I don't know what that would be, honestly. I mean, you shouldn't be getting liquids in your keyboard, but I guess if you did, maybe that's what that is. I don't know. I don't know. Alright, so back to the front. Like I said, totally standard layout. No surprises there. Let's pull off one of these caps. So these are made of PBT, which is a high quality plastic that is favored for higher end keyboard keycaps. It's used typically on more expensive boards and keycap sets over ABS. These are shine through double shot caps. So if we flip it over and we look at the back here, you can see we've got a clear layer down the bottom there. And that's what the legends are made of. Because they are double shot, they will never ever wear. And because they're PBT, they should not pick up finger oils the way ABS does. They won't shine up the way ABS does. You can see just how rough the texturing is on these caps. Look at that. This is a very textured cap. And for some people, that might actually not be preferable. Some people might find this too rough. I, for one, really like it. I think it feels great. Although maybe I'll feel differently after typing on them for a while. But I doubt it. I think it feels very high quality. Also, look at how thick this is. This is right up there with the best caps that I've seen. You know, I've got some nice sets of caps from the likes of Acco and Max Key, these kinds of companies. And this is right up there with those. So, no flex really to speak of. Nice, thick, high quality PBT cap. So there's those darker gray ones, and then there's these lighter gray ones as well. The legends look very sharp, especially for a double shot. Often you get slightly softer or more primitive looking legends with double shot caps, but these look to be very, very sharp and high quality. You can see that translucent plastic in there that provides the legend. Honestly, probably the nicest shine-through caps I've ever seen. So that makes a very strong impression. Let's take a quick look at the switches here, because these are, as I said, the speed silvers. They are a linear switch. Silver stem, transparent upper housing, white bottom housing, linear action. No bump, no click, nothing like that. These might not be for everyone. I prefer a bump or a click. I'm not a huge fan of linear switches myself, but that's okay. I was happy to get this with these switches because I've never had a chance to try these out. A little bit of wobble on the stem, but not bad. It probably says kale on it. I can't tell from my angle. But what I'll do is I'll pop this off and we'll take a look. Very quiet. Honestly, I don't notice really that the action is shorter. Maybe the actuation distance, the total travel distance, excuse me, on the Kale Speed Silvers is really not. Oh, maybe it is a bit shorter. Yeah, I guess it feels a bit shorter. I'll have to look out some tech specs on these switches. I'm not familiar with them. And I guess the actuation distance is shorter, even if that travel distance doesn't feel dramatically different. But that's what I'm going to do. Let's pull this switch off and just take a quick look at it. So our keycap, or our switch puller, pardon me, just grip you like this. Grab the top and bottom of the switch, and pull. Pops out very nicely. Not too much struggle at all. Underneath, nice clean white PCB, surface mounted LED. Nothing else to see. Very simple. That seems to be sort of a guiding feature or design principle of this board. Keep it simple. You can actually see how nice and thick that top layer of aluminum is by looking in around the edges of the socket there. Very solid. Alright, so standard switch. Couple of little contact pins. White lower housing, clear upper. That silver stem. And it says something. It says kale. It does. Also known as Kaiwa. Kaiwa. Same company. If you see something listed as a Kaiwa switch, it's a kale switch. They're good. They're very good. They make some excellent switches. Their box switches are some of my favorites. But even their Cherry MX clones are very good and competent. I don't know if you can see the branding there, but trust me, it's there. So, of course, hot swap sockets here. You could swap these out with whatever standard Cherry MX style switch you want. Any box switch. You could swap it out with Gatorons, Temus, Cherries, other Kales, Zelios, Holy Pandas, whatever you want. This board should take them. Halos, Hackos. Alright. What was I gonna... Oh, one other thing. I want to take a look to see what these stabilizers are like. Stabilizers feel good. No rattle to speak of there. I bet they're lubed. Factory lubed. But let's pull off one of these here just to take a look. Nope, that is the wrong tool. We want to use this guy. Such nice caps. All right, and let's see. I reckon they are, although I don't see obviously any lubrication on them, but they move in such a way that they don't rattle. They move softer than that. So I think they probably have been. But like I said, I don't see it. Interesting. They certainly act like they have been anyway, and I guess that's what really matters, isn't it? Tiny bit of rattle, but really not much. Nice smooth action. All right. Okay, so, well, this thing makes a heck of a first impression. You guys know that I'm a sucker for minimalistic kind of designs, nice and clean designs, and this absolutely nails it. I love the gray on gray color scheme with the keycaps. I love the matte silver backplate, and I love the simplicity of this kind of sandwich style design that's just flat all the way around. Nice rounded edges. The edges along the backplate are chamfered all the way around, or beveled, whatever. I don't honestly know what the difference between chamfered and beveled is. I just use the words interchangeably. My dark secret. But this thing feels like a premium product, no doubt about it. It is refined, it is simple, it is very, very solid. So it makes an incredible impression coming out of the box. And like I said, those caps look and feel amazing. But there's more to it than the first impression, of course. So next up, we're going to take a look at the lighting, and there's a fair bit to see there, because there's the backlighting and the side lighting, the 360-degree side lighting. And then we'll look at the software, which is QMK driven. And then we'll go for a typing test before gathering back round to run down the pros and cons and the final verdict on Massdrop's Control keyboard. Let's get on with it. And here we have the Massdrop Control plugged in and looking absolutely gorgeous, if I'm being totally honest. In past reviews, I've talked about how, some keyboards have better quality LEDs than others. They have less flicker, they have more saturated colors, they have smoother gradients. And I have to say that the Control puts them all to shame, with the possible exception of the Drivo Blademaster Pro, which also had some really nice looking LEDs, but I honestly think that the Control here has it beat. You can see for yourself, I've actually changed my filming configuration here for this segment, and I've got an overhead view so that you can really appreciate the way the light plays across the board and get a better idea of it. And then I've also got over here my side angle view, which is, I think, necessary to really appreciate not just the backlighting, but also the underlighting on this board. And I'll probably do this kind of setup going ahead when I review boards with both the backlighting and the underlighting. So if you are seeing any flickering, I have to say it is just an artifact of the camera. I don't see any flickering at all in real life. It is gorgeously smooth, the way the lighting animates and the transitions, blending between the colors. You might be getting a little bit, though. It's to do with the shutter speed. I always explain this every time, but it's to do with the frequency of the LEDs and the shutter speed of my cameras. So anyway, hopefully this filming setup gives you a better feel for what the backlighting and side lighting, or underlighting rather, whatever you want to call it, actually look like. Okay, so now that I've explained how much I like these LEDs, let's go through the default lighting options on this board. So those are controlled by holding the function key, of course, and you can use function A and D to swap previous and next lighting patterns. So this is the default that you get when you plug it in. We've also got just static rainbow, solid color, various solid colors, sort of the major ones you'd expect. We've got a single color kind of wave situation, or I guess it's a bicolor wave, which is kind of nice. There's a single color wave. And you can see each of these is synchronized with the side lighting. So you've probably noticed that, or the underlighting. I'm going to call it underlighting for consistency's sake. That the underlighting is not doing its own thing. It is strictly following along with the backlighting, which looks good, you know. And then that's, I guess, just off. And then we're back to the rainbow ripple. So by default, the control doesn't have any reactive typing modes, like where, you know, you press a key and it shoots out ripples or something from that key. That is available if you're willing to do a bit of work. We'll talk about that in a moment, because the way you configure the lighting on this board is not like other boards. It uses the open source QMK firmware, which it has benefits and it has some drawbacks, and we'll definitely talk about that in a second. This is my first encounter with QMK. But anyway, in addition to being able to switch between those lighting modes, you can, of course, increase and decrease speed. So if we want to make this go really fast, there we go. Just whipping along. Can slow it right down, and that's function Q and E. Slow it way down. Okay, until it freezes. That's a little bit too slow maybe, but there we go. It's a nice leisurely RGB wave. And you can, of course, see the lighting, the underlighting here tracking along with the backlighting. But in addition to that, you can, let's speed that up a little bit. You can also increase and decrease the brightness, of course. Function W to increase. This is max brightness. Function S to decrease. It's a bunch of steps. That's the dimmest you can get before it turns off. But you can do it sort of stepwise. It seems like there's maybe, I don't know, 10 steps in the brightness gradient, something like that. One thing I notice is that you don't really know when you hit the top or the bottom of a setting, because there's no, like on other keyboards I've used, a light will flash when you max out or bottom out on a setting, but I don't see that happening here. So that's a little bit unfortunate, but it's not a deal breaker. What else? Oh yes, of course. You can also change the direction of these patterns. So that's function caps lock. So now we're going right to left as opposed to left to right. And any of these patterns that have animation and directionality to them can be changed in this fashion. So if we do it again, we now get a top to bottom, bottom to top, inside to outside ripple. Look at that. This is, I think, my favorite. I just love the way it looks. The colors are so vivid and the gradients are so smooth. And then an outside to inside, which is pretty cool too. This is largely why I wanted to show you this top-down view, because I think you really get a good feel for what's happening and the smoothness of those gradients from this perspective. And then we're back to left to right ripple. Let's just go through. Let's do the inside to outside ripple. I just really like that one. Function X will toggle all the LEDs on or off. There we go. Off, on, off, on. And it will remember the last setting you had selected, clearly. And then function Z, or Z if you're American, but I'm Canadian. Function Z will toggle between the underlighting, what they call it, edge lighting, side lighting, edge lighting, underlighting, whatever. I guess edge lighting is probably the most accurate name for this. Edge lighting. So edge lighting and backlighting. Press function Z, that turns off the edge lighting. We now have only the backlight. Again, we have just the edge lighting, which is actually a really pretty mode when viewed from above, isn't it? And you can see, you can see the individual LEDs. There's quite a few of them all around the edge. But the gradients are still pretty smooth. And it casts the light a decent distance onto your desk. Like so, which is pretty nice. And then function Z, we'll turn them all off, which is the same functionality as function X. But I also like how when you turn it on and off, it sort of fades on and off. There's a quick fade there, as opposed to just snapping. Anyway, it all feels very well thought out, very refined. I especially appreciate the way you control the lights, because instead of function and then some weird bracket keys and backspace and things over here, it's right where you're used to putting your fingers. And everything's very intuitive. It's basically these, 8 keys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, will control all your lighting, well, and Z and X, I guess. But yeah, it's quite intuitive, very easy to configure your lighting that way. And I'm just so enthralled by the beauty of the lighting on this board. I can't stress enough just how nice it looks, especially compared to some more inexpensive boards that have sort of harsher looking LEDs that almost seem to have a bit of flicker. They don't actually flicker, but sometimes those cheaper boards, the LEDs have a harsher shine to them, not nearly such a smooth look to the coloration. And the copy on the website for the control says that these LEDs, the 100 hertz frequency. So that's what I've got my camera's shutter speed set to here. So hopefully that has eliminated the flicker for you. But yeah, if you do see any, it is not present in person. Okay, there's also a few media keys that you can access with function. Function page up, page down, volume up, volume down. Function print will give you mute. Function insert gives you play pause. Function home is stop. Function delete is previous, and function end is next. So that's a little less intuitive, but again, it's all over here in this little nav cluster, which is easily accessed. And function N will toggle the board between 6-key rollover mode, which is the default, which is really probably enough for anyone, but you can go function N to toggle N-key rollover mode, which I don't know why they wouldn't necessarily have that as the default option. That just means you can press down as many keys as you want at once, and they will all register. Whereas 6-key rollover mode, after you've pressed down 6 keys simultaneously, it'll stop registering new inputs. Again, I don't really see a benefit to having it on 6-key mode, so you might as well set it to N-key mode, although I'm sure there's some reason why it defaults to 6 key. Anyway, that's the rundown on the built-in functionality, and there's really nothing beyond that. A handful of lighting options, good ones, they look nice, but not a lot of them, and they aren't reactive, as I was explaining. And then a few media shortcut keys and things like that. One thing worth noting is that it doesn't seem to remember your last configuration option for lighting after you unplug it. If you unplug it and replug it, it defaults to that left to right rainbow scroll. It's not a big deal. It does seem a little strange to me. Anyhow, the next thing to talk about is configurability with software. And as I was alluding to earlier, it's a bit different than you might be used to. It uses a very popular open source firmware called QMK, Quantum Mechanical Keyboard, I think it stands for, firmware, which has all kinds of support for a bunch of different keyboards powered by, I believe, Amtel and ARM-based controllers. I'm fairly certain. Don't quote me on that. But at any rate, that is what this board uses for configurability. And Massdrop has made a web-based configurator, which we'll look at in a moment here, which lets you configure the lighting and also remap any of the keys. You can also, if you really want, you can get your hands dirty, you can download the source code for the firmware and you can program your own backlighting and key maps and stuff into it. That's beyond the scope of what this video can cover, and as I explained, this is my first encounter with the QMK firmware, so I'm not even going to attempt to do that here, but I will show you the online configurator. However, I can't show you the board. Well, I could show you the board at the same time, but it would be pointless, because what you do with the online configurator is you set up the way the lighting and the key map the way you want it, and then you have to download, you have to essentially compile and download your firmware, and you have to flash it to your board. So your edits are not in real time, which is kind of a big drawback when you think about it. You can't configure and play around with your lighting effects in real time, to the best of my knowledge. Now, maybe someone with more knowledge can correct me on that, but that's my understanding, at least. Anyway, so we're just going to take a look now at the online QMK configurator for the Massdrop control. Okay, so here we have the online configurator for the Massdrop control. This is all just in a browser, so you don't have to download any software. And it's very clean and very straightforward to use. This is the default layout, obviously, and you can see all the keys in your tenkeyless physical layout, and you can select a key. So let's say, I don't know, Q. And then it provides you with options down here where you can rebind it to any standard key, all kinds of various Windows commands, media controls. Looks like there's some special QMK utility keys, and looks like other language toggles and things, all kinds of stuff. But not only that, you can have it act as a modifier so that it activates another layer. So for example, right now the function key is bound to modifier 1, which toggles layer 1, which is all those lighting functions and things that we were just looking at. But there are all kinds of other things you can do here, it looks like. When pressed, toggles active status for layer. So that's a toggle versus a hold. Oh, I see. Layer. So this LT function allows you to activate the layer when held, but just activate the key when tapped. So that would allow you to retain the default function of a key, for instance, like Q or whatever. Not that you'd use Q as a modifier for a layer, but you could. But let's say you wanted to use Alt. You could use right Alt as you hold it down for, say, layer 2, if you made a layer 2. But if you just tap it, it operates as right Alt. Something like that, anyway. So there's lots and lots of options. When pressed switches default layer, when pressed activates layer and deactivates all other layers except for default. When held activates layer, when repeatedly tapped toggles active status for layer. So lots of cool options here. Modifiers. I'm not even quite sure what this does. When held sends modifiers, when tapped sends key. I don't know how that differs from, well, anyway. Very interesting. And special. There's a whole list of special functionality. Now, this whole configurator that we're looking at here is designed and maintained by Mastrop using the open source QMK firmware. There is also a generic QMK keyboard configurator that will work for all kinds of keyboards, and you can find that if you Google it, but it might be more feature rich. I'm honestly not quite sure because I haven't really looked into all of the functionality, but regardless, this one seems to have a lot. So I see here's all the LED controls, and of course this one will be more specific to the layout for the Mastrop control. So all kinds of options here. You can also independently brighten and darken the edge lighting. That's good to know. Okay. So as I was saying, of course, you can work on other layers. So layer 1 is included by default, and that has all those LED controls and all that kind of stuff in here. There's that N key rollover key. There's all those media keys I was mentioning. We could make a new layer if we wanted. Look at that. Layer 2 suddenly appears. By default, where it says TRNS, that means it's transparent. Transparent to the layer below. So in the absence of anything bound to this layer, it'll default to the functionality of layer 1, I believe. And if there's nothing mapped to it on layer 1, it'll default to layer 0. So that's really, yeah, we can delete that layer. A really clean and straightforward but relatively powerful key map editor, which is excellent. Now, as you can see, there's also an LED tab here. If we tap there, we see each individual LED on the board is addressable. So each key, obviously, each switch has an LED behind it. Then we also gain access to all the LEDs for our edge lighting, which is pretty cool. It says here double click to select all LEDs with the same configuration. That's handy. Or shift click to select more than one. I see. Very good. And if we double click there, because these are all configured the same, we grab them all. So by default, all the LEDs have access to all patterns, which are the patterns that we stepped through before. Now it looks like, well, let's just see, I don't know, let's pick the space bar here. Okay, so now that one is bound to, I guess, just the rainbow scrolling. Now it's going to look a little weird because it's just a single key, but I guess if you select all the rest and set them to rainbow scrolling, that's an option. I don't know why you would do that, and I'm a little confused how the layers work here. I don't know. There are 2 layers though. And it looks like we can't add new layers. But I suppose if they're all set to one configuration, then you can't change through them using the function A and D. I'm not quite sure how that works. Or you can turn them off. You can also bind them to individual colors. So if you wanted to make the tilde key, I don't know, whatever, you can either use a hex code for it or you can use a color picker, which is built in here, which is nice. What you can't do in this configurator, though, is you cannot create your own, lighting patterns or functions. Like you can't, say, create a reactive light where when you press the button, you get the ripple outwards or something like that. You can do that using QMK, but you have to get your hands dirty programming. So if you have the ability and the know-how, QMK is incredibly powerful and flexible. You can do all kinds of other stuff that is not available using this online configurator. You can bind macros and things like that. You can create custom light patterns and a whole host of other stuff that honestly I'm still learning about because, as I said, this is my first exposure to QMK. But as you can imagine, for an open source piece of software, or as an open source piece of software, there are many, many clever people that do really cool stuff with it, and the sky's kind of the limit when it comes to configurability. So on one hand, very powerful, open source, non-proprietary, which is excellent. On the other hand, kind of daunting if you don't code, if you have no experience with QMK. And if you're just looking for a kind of easy click and done solution, you do have this online configurator, the specific Massdrop control configurator maintained by Massdrop. There's also the generic configurator that's available, which maybe has some different options, I'm not sure. But it is still a limited subset of what you can do with QMK, which is kind of too bad. It would be nice, for example, to be able to program macros using the online configurator. But as near as I can tell, that's not doable. So if you're up for a challenge, or if you have the ability, you can do some pretty cool stuff. So once you've created your lighting layout or your key map or whatever that you're content with, you compile and download it, and that gives you a file, and then you use the QMK loader application for your operating system, which you can download from the QMK website. I think it's actually, it's a GitHub repository, and it's open source, of course. And then you use that to load your new firmware onto the board, which I believe actually entails resetting the board using, there's a physical button on the back. Remember when we were unboxing? There's that little pinhole, and I stupidly thought maybe, I don't know why this was what I thought, but I thought maybe it was for draining liquids or something out of the board, because I've seen similar things before on other boards, but no, of course not. It's a physical reset switch. So you have to, using the command line, so the Windows prompt, DOS prompt, I guess, run prompt, there's a string you have to type in there pointed at your compiled and downloaded firmware. It'll then give you 60 seconds to, I think, go and press that reset button after it's loaded it on. And I believe that does the trick. I haven't actually done it, to be completely honest. I haven't tried it, but I probably will, just to see what it's all about. But in theory, that's the process. So yeah, a little bit daunting for some users, perhaps. And this sort of easy access web-based interface is not as powerful as some of the software, the proprietary software that you see from other companies. So it's a bit of a double-edged blade using this QMK software. But yeah, if you want to get your hands dirty, you're willing to learn a bit, or you already have the programming skill, then incredibly powerful and flexible firmware abilities. So with all that said, oh, one final point. If you have an account with drop.com, you get the option here to save configurations, and it'll save it to your account on drop.com, which is great. I'm not logged in right now, so the option's not here, but you can save key maps and LED settings to your account on Drop, which is great. All right, that was a lot of talking. We looked at the lighting, of course, the default lighting. We've taken a little look at the online configurator and talked a bit about QMK and its benefits and drawbacks. Now it's time for everybody's favorite, the typing test. So these are Kale MX, or not MX because it's Kale, but Kale Speed Silver switches. And they are a linear switch. They're designed with a slightly shorter travel distance and slightly higher actuation point. So we're going to give them a listen. I'll try them out. Then we will reconvene, and I'll tell you about my experiences using this board, from the feel of typing on it, the switches to the caps to just day-to-day use. And then I'll run down the pros and cons and give you my final verdict. But first, the typing test. Okay, so we've had a chance to give this keyboard the full rundown. We gave it a lavish and detailed unboxing. We took a look at the RGB backlighting as well as the edge lighting. We took a look at the online QMK configurator that was hosted by drop.com for this keyboard. And we took it for a typing test, so you got to hear it and see it in action. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this review, I've actually had this keyboard for quite a while, so I've been able to test it extensively for many, many months. And my impressions of this keyboard are nothing short of glowing. The drop control is a stellar keyboard, and everything that it has on paper, it delivers on in the actual product, really. There's very little to say negative about this keyboard. The typing experience is excellent. That nice heavy aluminum frame results in a very solid typing experience. The stabilizers that the keyboard uses are of good quality. I do not think in retrospect that they are lubricated. I mentioned in the unboxing, I thought maybe they were. I don't think they are. You do get a little bit of rattle in there, especially I noticed on the space bar, has a little tick to it. But that is easily remedied, of course, if you so chose, because this keyboard can be easily taken apart. You can take out all the switches. They are hot swap sockets after all. Take out all the switches. You can easily open up the case. If you wanted, you could loop those stabilizers. You could band-aid mod them, whatever you wanted, with relative ease. This is the flexibility of having a sort of modular board like this that comes apart relatively easily. The Kale speed silver switches themselves, I'm not a huge fan, but I'm not a huge fan of linears in general. They are fine switches, nothing wrong with them. They're just not my kind of switch. But actually, I've swapped out the switches on this board a couple of times while I've had it so far. I put in some Kale Box heavy burnt orange switches, which were nice to use for a while. And right now it's got Halo Clears in it, which are really velvety smooth, and they work really well with that nice solid heavy aluminum chassis. The backlighting on this thing and the edge lighting continues to be best in class. Honestly, I can't think of any keyboard I've reviewed that looks better than this keyboard, especially when it's lit up. And I am a sucker for the minimalist, clean, low-profile aesthetic that the control uses, so I fully admit that that's my jam. Maybe it isn't for you, but I think this thing just looks so good. I really do. In terms of the keycaps, this is somewhere where this board might be slightly divisive. They're really great looking keycaps. They are very solid quality keycaps, nice and thick. Double shot PBT. They don't shine up. Even after months of use, no evidence of shining up. But they are quite textured. Now, I do like that. It feels kind of nice. They are quite a bit rougher than what you might be used to, though. And if you are the type of person that's used to just gliding over the top of your keycaps, you might find that these keycaps almost slow you down a bit because there's just a bit of extra friction there. I know that sounds like a strange way to describe it, but I can't quite explain it any other way. It's just like the extra friction on the keycaps makes it a little harder to float and glide, and so it might feel like you're working a little harder to type. And I did find that combined with the Halo Clears, which are a heavier switch, it felt a little sludgy in the typing experience, just because those switches require quite a bit of force to actuate, and those keycaps are quite textured and rough. So as opposed to, say, smoother keycaps with like really smooth switches or light switches, like, Gatoron Reds or something. This is there's more effort involved in the typing experience. Now, of course, you can swap out the caps on this thing easily because it is a perfectly standard tenkeyless layout, and you can swap out the switches easily because of the hot swap sockets. So, but the stock keycaps, although they are beautiful, although they are very well made, they might not be for everyone. I think I still like them. I like touching them. I like having my fingers on them, but the typing experience with them requires a little bit more commitment, maybe, to your actions than you might be used to. Anyway, that's been my experience using this thing over many months. And that's really pretty much everything I have to say about the usage and typing experience. It is a very solid board. It is a pleasure to use day in and day out. It looks amazing on my desk. Very little to say about it that's negative. It is really solid. So now that I've shared now that I've given you a rundown of the usage experience and my general impressions of using it, it's time to summarize the pros and the cons of the drop control before I give you my final verdict. Starting with the pros. There's a lot to like about this keyboard, as you've probably gathered from what I've said so far. The first thing is its striking design. This thing is beautiful. It is like a solid plank of aluminum, and you've got that sandwich style design with the aluminum top plate, then that 360-degree band of edge lighting, and then that very solid aluminum bottom plate combines to make this gorgeous looking keyboard. Honestly, I think it looks so good. Then, of course, we have the exemplary build quality. This is an impeccably built keyboard. There is nothing amiss. The tolerances are so tight on this manufacturer. Everything looks and feels super duper solid, and that translates into a very solid typing experience. This thing feels so great to use. In a similar vein, we have excellent keycaps. The stock keycaps on the control are really a cut above anything you see on other sort of consumer grade keyboards. They are super thick. They are made of PBT. The legends are double shot shine through legends that look very sharp and nicely detailed, which is often a pitfall of double shot shine through caps. You often get these kind of rudimentary looking legends. Not the case here. These keycaps look and feel amazing. They do have a rougher texture than you're probably used to, rougher than any other keycaps I've used, actually. That might be somewhat polarizing for some people, but I do like it. It adds a unique feel to them, and like I said, they look really great. They do not shine up. There's no evidence of them shining up over the many months that I've been using this, from finger oils getting on them or anything like that. They look and feel amazing. This is another small thing, but it's nice to see a USB Type-C port for the connector, and also a secondary one that can be used as a connector on the other side, or as a USB hub port, or like a pass-through if you want to charge things or plug in USB-C cable peripherals, for example. You could argue that the Type-C connector doesn't have as much utility as the Type-A connector, even in 2020. But I think we're heading that direction. Eventually, everything's going to be Type-C, I hope. It's a forward-looking design choice anyway. It's certainly not hard to find a USB Type-C cable these days, so that's great to see. Another thing that's great to see, of course, is the hot swap sockets. Now, these aren't the kind of limited hot swap that you see on so many cheaper boards. These are full-fledged hot swap sockets that will take any plate mount switch you throw at it, from cherry switches to kale to Outemo to, Zelios or Halos or whatever. Pretty much anything you can imagine. So the sky's the limit with customizing this board, and those very flexible hot swap sockets give it longevity is what they confer, because if you get tired of a particular typing feel or a new switch comes to the market that you want to try out, it is trivial to just pop out your old switches, slap in a new set, and you're off to the races. So those full-fledged hot swap sockets are wonderful to see. Also wonderful to see is the RGB backlighting and edge lighting on this board. Oh my gosh. As you saw during the lighting tests, this is a gorgeous board when it's all lit up. It is best in class, in my opinion. I don't think I have seen a keyboard with nicer looking backlighting or edge lighting. The colors are just so vivid and saturated and rich, and the gradients are so smooth. Usually, and especially in cheaper keyboards, you get a kind of an unpleasant sharpness to the LEDs, or the transitions feel very abrupt. There's not a lot of blending, or the colors just look a little bit washed out in certain parts of the spectrum. Not the case here. All the colors look fantastic. The gradients look so nice and diffuse and smooth. Really fantastic RGB implementation on this keyboard. And finally, I have to call out the open source firmware. Now, this is admittedly a bit of a double-edged blade for some people, because the QMK firmware can be a bit intimidating to get into for new users, and it is not the easiest thing to learn to use, and it can be a little clunky as well in the way that you have to compile and download your updated firmware, and then use a utility to flash it onto the board, and you have to use that reset button on the back. It's a little messy, it is, but the upshot of this is that it is incredibly flexible and incredibly powerful. I did say a handful of times throughout the review that this was my first brush with QMK. At the time of filming those parts, that was true. I have since had more experience using QMK with the Prionic Rev 3, which was also sent by Drop.com, and I have found it to be not as scary as it might initially seem. If you take some time to get used to it and how it all works, it's really not that bad. And the fact that you have this continuously updated open source firmware really, I think, is the way to go. You don't have any of that janky proprietary software that you get with lesser boards. So I do think that Drop is to be commended for going the QMK route with the control. In terms of cons, I do have a few things that I would like to bring up, but these are all honestly really minor. The first thing is that the cable that's included with this keyboard doesn't quite live up to the level of polish and build quality of the rest of the board. It's just a basic, PVC wrapped cable with nothing really special to distinguish it. It would have been nice to get a nicer looking, braided cable, perhaps, especially at this price point, with some nice aluminum accents, maybe housing on either end to match the aluminum case of the keyboard. It just seems like a little bit of a missed opportunity. Second thing I'd like to call out here is that the stock keycaps might be a little bit rough for some people. I've talked about this already quite a bit. I won't go further into it. It's just to say that some people might not like the rougher texture on the stock keycaps. Third thing I'm bringing up here is that those magnetic feet, well, they look nice and they're very satisfying to pop into place and remove. They could get lost. And I honestly think that just typical kind of flip out feet might serve the user, the end user, better. As cool as the magnetic ones are, I just worry that, yeah, if you lose one, then you're kind of out of luck. Fourth thing I want to mention here is something I actually already kind of went over in the pros, but that's that QMK can be daunting for beginners. If this is your first exposure to QMK firmware, there's a bit of a learning curve. This is not a simple couple of clicks and off you go solution, and it does have its drawbacks, like you can't make real-time changes to lighting to sort of test them out and see what they look like. So QMK, not perfect. On the whole, I think it is a positive. That's why it's in the pros section, but it is daunting if you were just getting started. So I think that's worth mentioning. That may mean that, it's not for everybody. And finally, I have to address the fact, you can't really get around the fact, that this keyboard is a bit pricey. At $200, that's a fair chunk of change, and that's a big decision for a lot of people. Now, I must make it clear, I do not think that is an unfair price for this keyboard, given the feature set, given the build quality, given its potential longevity with the hot swap sockets and the standard keycap layout and all that sort of stuff. I don't think $200 is unfair, but it's still a fair chunk of change, and it might create some sticker shock in people who aren't used to seeing or considering such premium keyboards. So, after all of that, what is my final verdict on the drop control mechanical keyboard? Well, let me make this simple for you. If you're looking for a tenkeyless board and you can afford the $200 asking price, you need look no further than the drop control. It is honestly that good, and it feels like it is worth every penny. It has been a pleasure to use these past months while I've been testing it, and it has become my go-to daily driver. It is my frequent recommendation for people looking for the ultimate tenkeyless keyboard. I really do think it has succeeded in that goal. And because of its very forward-looking feature set, like hot-swappable sockets, like open-source QMK firmware, in addition to its excellent build quality and a lovely RGB implementation, the drop control could just be the last keyboard you ever need to buy. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another relaxing review. It has been a long one, and if you've stuck with me to the end, bravo. Give yourself a little pat on the back. It was a lot, I know, but I hope that it was worthwhile for you. Special thanks, of course, to drop.com for sending over the review sample of the control that we looked at here today. There is, of course, a link down in the video description if you're interested in checking out the control for yourself on drop.com. I must let you know that at the time of publication, it is in a pre-order phase, so they don't have any in stock at the time of publication. Here I have gotten y'all excited about this keyboard, and you can't get it just yet, but you can pre-order it. And again, at the time of recording, the estimated ship date is September 2020, so that's a few months away, but it's worth the wait. I promise you it will be. It is really that good of a keyboard. And of course, hey, thanks to all of you guys for watching. I hope you found this informative, and I hope you found it relaxing. And I look very forward to having you back here next time for another episode of Relaxing Reviews. Bye for now, my friends.